Hi, my name is Sari van Poelje. I'm the director of Intact Academy. We give training programs for coaches, consultants, and leaders from beginner coach to team coach to supervisor. I also run a business called Agile Innovation Design, Business Design, where we help businesses innovate more quickly than their products. If you want to know more, look us up. You can find us on the internet with our own websites. We're talking about team coaching and more particularly about the levels of team coaching. We've talked about the structural level, the relational level, and the psychodynamic level. Now I want to go back a little bit towards, how do you diagnose really? What kind of diagnostic diagrams do we use in team coaching using transactional analysis? And that also informs your interventions. So Eric Berne really talked about 6 different diagnostic diagrams. He talked about a location diagram. So you literally draw a team where you show the physical situation of the team. In a group, you draw a seating diagram. Where do people sit? In an organization, you probably draw, what level of quite literally, what level of the building is that department situated at, and with what other departments can they physically have contact? Often that already gives a lot of insight into why, for instance, decision-making processes are difficult. The difficulty, of course, now with seating diagrams and location diagrams is that we're all on Zoom or Teams. And in Zoom or Teams, everyone is exactly the same size. And you can't really see who is sitting next to whom because it's something that Zoom randomly does. So we're missing a lot of information in Zoom, which would help you see what are the natural alliances in a group through seating diagrams. The second diagnostic diagram that Eric Berne uses is called an authority diagram. An authority diagram shows, I guess that you would translate that into hierarchy, but it also shows a historical timeline. It's both. So the hierarchy shows in the formal structure what level of authority people have. That's really important, especially if decision-making processes aren't working the way they should, or people are caught in decision-making. I have a team now that says they say they're caught in the roundabout, like in traffic, in decision-making. So every time a decision looms for them and they're ready to take it, someone goes back to what is the definition of what we're trying to do. And you can see that really as a dynamic problem, but in this case, it's also an authority structure problem because in this organization, the hierarchy is actually not very clear. You've got a hierarchy which is for the service organization. It happens to be a psychological an organization that offers psychological services to clients. Well, they have 2 types of hierarchy. One is psychiatrist, psychotherapist, social workers, which is a different hierarchy to the formal organization hierarchy, which is CEO, staff management. And because these hierarchies aren't aligned, there is a confusion about who can take what decisions. So you can see that the authority diagram is quite important as well as a diagnostic tool. And it really helps to draw different hierarchies there are within a team to see where they're stuck. The third diagnostic diagram, Berne called a structural diagram, which is the boundary diagram we talked about earlier. So in this boundary diagram, we've got the major external boundary distinguishing the outside from the inside, and the major internal boundary distinguishing the leaders from the members. If you see that there are this boundary is unclear, I always ask myself, where is the boundary? Are the right people in or out? So is it placed in the right way? Is it open or closed correctly? Because sometimes it's too open and then everyone can just walk in and out, which creates a lot of dynamic in a team. Sometimes leaders aren't really taking their place. Sometimes leaders are much too rigid in their, ivory tower, and they don't let any information come in from the work floor. Well, there's all sorts of ways to look at that. Berne called that laxity or rigidity of boundaries. Very important, permeability of boundaries. It's really important to draw that so you have a visualization of where could there be lesions in this boundary. Where is it too open? Where is it too closed? Is it in the right place? I've had leaders in small organizations, especially I'm working with one team now, where the leader says, he contractually actually made a clause in the contracts with members saying you have to do your work on your own completely independently of the leaders. And it's a forming group, which is a really, I understand if it's a mature group that you really want people to work independently. But in a forming group, a leader is really a central figure. And so what you see there is that he's absent in that boundary of leadership. And so people are starting to form little alliances within the membership that are taking over the informal leadership. And so it becomes quite chaotic to work in a team like that. Drawing the boundaries for him really helped because he could see there was a leadership slot. If he didn't like what was going on, he suddenly flew in and said, no, you're not doing it the way I want it to happen. And then people became really confused because he was going in and out, really ambivalent leadership. And it really helped him to draw the boundary and to realize that he was necessary in this stage of the formation of the team. Berne also draws a fourth diagnostic diagram, which he calls a dynamic diagram. And the dynamic diagram is you draw the boundaries and then you draw arrows to show where the dynamics are and how big they are. And if they're compensated for by the cohesion. So you have, for instance, a really big pressure on a team, you draw a big arrow saying, economic crisis, corona, big, it pushes the team together. And then you draw dynamics internally. So for instance, you draw the agitation on the leadership boundary. The members are revolting against the leaders because they're saying, the leaders aren't doing their job in corona, and the leaders are agitating against the members. Oh, they're not taking enough initiative. You draw these arrows. That's a dynamic diagram. And then you draw, how much cohesion is there actually counteracting these dynamics? Because if these agitation, intrigue, and pressure is bigger than the cohesion, obviously they will displace the boundaries. You can imagine that. It's really helpful to draw a dynamic diagram because you can see where, the boundaries get pushed more than there is cohesion. Then you run the risk of lesions in the boundaries, and you will see that the energy goes more towards the internal dynamics than towards working for the client. And so dynamic diagrams are really important. The fifth diagram that Berne talks about is the group dynamic, the group imago diagram. He draws it as a kind of a UFO. So literally it looks like this. Think ET phone home. And in this little dome, he draws the leader, because the leader is central in the archaic formation of groups. We are born in relationship, and that in that relationship, we're born into a group. All of us, we may die alone, but we certainly aren't born alone. So we're always born in relationship in a group. And so the leader is in that imago always, but people have different forms of recognition that there are also other members in their imago of the group. There are very, as your imago gets more clarified, you differentiate more in a group. That's really what's going on. So as you differentiate more, you see, oh, there's not only a leader and me, there's also Peter, Paul, Mary. And the more you differentiate, the more you adapt your imago to the reality of the team as is. So group imago, it's interesting because it's an unconscious, intrapsychic thing. So drawing a group imago, yeah, you can represent it, of course, because it shows what your internal experience is of the group. You can ask people to draw their group imago. I usually ask people to just draw, how do you see this team? And people draw it in very many different ways. I sometimes ask people to draw, if the group was an animal, what animal would it be? That gives you a lot of information as well. But group imago diagrams are interesting because it shows how adapted are people to the reality of the group. I've had one client where the whole team drew the group without the leader in it. That was interesting. So they completely blanked out any form of leadership. And it's truth to tell, they did act like kind of abandoned children in the sense that they really drew together. And any new leader that was coming in really had a problem because they were trying to blank out the leader, saying, even literally to the leader, so as a member, what do you think of this? And I thought, well, how interesting they use these words. And then I realized that because they'd had 6 different leaders in the last 2 years, they'd actually decided to function without leadership, even in their imago. So, drawing a group imago diagram is interesting and important. The last diagnostic diagram that Berne talks about is a transactional diagram. So I guess you could call it a form of a sociogram, we'd say outside of TA, but it's really drawing the way how people transact to each other. So if you would draw the ego state, what kind of transactions would people have? Are they more parental transactions? Are they more child transactions? Are they more adult to adult transactions? So we look at the way people transact actually betrays how they experience the group inside. So a transactional diagram gives you a lot of information as well. My question to you is, if you would draw these 6 diagrams of the team, what are your top 3 hypotheses about where this team is stuck? Good luck.